But what we're going to be talking about today, here's some of the questions that we're going to be actually answering today. Then we're going to have time for Q&A and some discussion. What is corporate or organizational culture? What does it mean? We're going to define that. What does an excellent culture look like? That way you can kind of have a vision of where you want to get to or where you would like to get to. What does God say about culture? There's no better instruction manual in life than Scripture. So what does God say about sculpture? We're going to be sharing that. We're going to learn what we can learn from Nehemiah. What a great, I recommend in this other group I mentioned, I talked about building leaders at the 9 o'clock a.m. session. And I highly recommend all of you to reread the book of Nehemiah. 13 chapters. If I was you, I would read 13 and then read the 13 again. In 26 days, read them twice. I mean, what a great example of leadership. What a great example of culture. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we can learn. I mean, Nehemiah's in the Bible for a reason. Every word of the Bible is for a reason. And God has shown us through the book of Nehemiah about building culture and building leadership. What can you do to structure an excellent organizational culture is what we're going to be answering today. And let's start with this. What is corporate culture? What do you think? Dave shared a little bit about kind of an official definition of culture. But what would you, in your mind and in your words, how would you define corporate culture? What would you see as culture? Please feel free to share. How you would view culture in your, like maybe even the organization you're in now. Not that it's good or bad, but how you would define it. What makes up the culture of an organization? Yeah, what people think. Yeah, their beliefs. Their goals and values, absolutely. How clear the mission is, how clear the vision is. Expectations. How they treat people, very good. Yeah, these are all of these things, and all of the above would be in the culture when you really look at how a company expresses its beliefs, its values, and that's going to fall under what their goals are and what the vision is. So all of those things make up the culture. How many of you have seen a bad culture in your life? So it looks like most of you have seen a bad culture. I have too. I've been a part of one. I've probably been part of the cause of one, even in my life, in my lifetime. So we've seen bad cultures, and that's not the cultures we want, is it? So we're going to talk about how we can change that, and really how we can impact culture no matter where we're at in an organization. Now, ideal place to change a culture would be to be the CEO. Then you can say, here's going to be our culture, and here's the path we're on. And you see that with companies like Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A and Coca-Cola Consolidated, the bottling part of Coca-Cola. You see those type of cultures. But no matter where you're at, I know individuals that are friends of mine that are head of the HR department, for example, for a large company. And that HR department has a wonderful culture. It even has somewhat of a different culture than the parent company. So you can impact, no matter where you're at, you can impact the culture, at least of the department, the division that you work in. I'm going to start off with just a personal example, and I'm just going to keep it really short. For my testimony is on my website, markwhitacre.com, my full testimony, and it's titled My Testimony, and goes to a video of a prayer breakfast event, of a large event, so it's professionally videoed, and it goes into a lot more detail than what I'm going to do today. But I was an example of a poor culture. I was even partly the cause of a poor culture. At 32 years old, I was number 4 executive, one of the largest companies in the world. We were number 56 on the Fortune 500, 30,000 employees. I was divisional president of the biotech division of that company. I reported right to the vice chairman. So out of the 30,000 employees, I was ranked number 4 executive. And none of us were Christians that were the top executive. I mean, the 30,000 people in the company were several Christians, but I'm talking about from the 4 top executives, the CEO, the vice chairman, the president, and myself. We weren't Christians. We were an example of what not to do. We were an example of selfish leadership, not servant leadership. And the culture that it bred in this 115-year-old company, and it's been around for years. It's one of the first companies on the New York Stock Exchange, one of the first companies. So they've been around for years. We were about $70 billion in revenue when I joined them. It was 1989. I'm 61 now, so I was 32 years old then. And I tell you, to have a 75-year-old CEO and a 69-year-old president and be the number 4 executive divisional president of the 56th largest company in America, it was pretty exciting. I mean, I thought I was Bon Jovi. And I had hair back then, too. And I lived my first week in the job, I got access to a Falcon 50. The 7 top executives got a corporate jet via number 4. I had a Falcon 50 given to me my first week at work there in 1989, October. I bought the CEO's home. He was 75 years old, moved to something smaller, closer to the airport in Decatur, Illinois. So I bought his home. It's a 13,000 square foot home, 8-car garage, horse riding stables where your kids ride inside during the wintertime on our own property, 3 golf greens on the property. It was a mansion, absolute mansion. It was the original home of John Daniels, who founded Archer Daniels Midland, and then it was the CEO's home for 30 years. And which was the second CEO, and then I had it for about 8 years, that home during the time I was divisional president. And I tell you, I thought I was a rock star. I thought at that time in my life, not having God in my life, if there's a heaven, this is it. This is what I was thinking. Mansion, Ferrari, Mercedeses. With my stock options and bonuses and base salary, I was earning $2 to $3 million a year the 8 years I was there in 1989. So that's about $10 million a year today. And Decatur, Illinois is a pretty low cost of living area too. So like I said, we were a big fish in a small pond. And Decatur, Illinois has about 80,000 people that live in Decatur, Illinois. 80,000, 30,000 work for ADM. So it's a company town. So to be a top executive in a town like that, of the company that dominated the town, was a very prestigious thing. And I think it bred, especially at 32, not having God in my life, it bred really narcissism. And I would say the 4 top executives of ADM, and then the other executives from all the other companies that we were involved with a price fixing scheme that went to prison, about 30 in total, I would say we went to prison for narcissism. We thought we were better than everybody else. The laws are for the little people, and we'll do whatever we do to get ahead. Now, what kind of culture does that sound like? It's a wrong culture. It's not a good culture. This is an example really of selfish leadership, not servant leadership. I mean, I could just imagine what those employees were thinking. Well, here are these top executives. They're being paid per hour. They're working in high fructose corn syrup plants or citric acid plants and hourly employees, and they see these executives driving around like rock stars. I'm sure, looking back, we look like fools. Look like fools to them, because there's so many things we could have done good for Decatur, Illinois, besides have bigger houses, more cars, and things of that sort. So that's not the culture you want. And as David mentioned, my wife, when I shared with her what was going on with the price fixing, that very day, it was going on for 12 years before I even joined the company. I was involved with the price fixing scheme for about 7 months before I shared it with my wife. And I shared it with Ginger, my wife, and she forced me to turn myself in. She was a Christian about 10 years before me, and she prayed about it when I shared it. And God told her that to turn me into the FBI. So she forced me to turn myself in. The FBI gave me a choice that day in November '92 to either wear a wire to go for the kingpins of the case, who've been doing it for 12 years, since I was only involved 7 months, or go to prison or get arrested. And I thought wearing a wire was a lot more attractive. So I became an informant, started wearing a wire. I met 4 FBI agents at 6 in the morning. They shaved my chest, hooked microphones to my chest, and I wore a wire every day for the FBI 10 hours a day for 3 years. That itself was an interesting experience, not one I recommend. Actually, it was harder than prison. Prison was a cakewalk compared to wearing a wire. And at the end of all that, I had this there's a lot more details that we don't have time to go into today, but at the end of that, I had a 6-month plea agreement opportunity that David mentioned that I had. My wife begged me to sign it. 6 months in prison after everything that happened was really a deal of a lifetime. I told her she's the one that got me in that mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite she wanted me to do. I ripped it up, fired the lawyer who recommended the 6-month plea agreement, and hired a whole bunch of lawyers and fought the case for 3.5, 4 years and got a 10-year sentence instead. And had a 6-month plea agreement right in my hand. I showed my wife, didn't I? I really showed her. I got a 10-year sentence instead, and there's no parole in the federal system. You have to do 8.5 years. You get 15% off good behavior. So I did 8.5 years from age 41 to age 49. And before I went to prison, a guy read about me in the newspaper. And when I had 8.5 years, I couldn't imagine going to prison for 8.5. I couldn't put my hands around it, even my head around it. I just couldn't imagine. So I tried to take my own life. I tried to kill myself. This would have been in '97. And a guy named Ian Howells showed up on my doorstep. He read about me in the newspaper. It's the only way he knew me. About all the things I just discussed was in the paper. The 6-month deal, throw it away, and try to take my own life. And I was a month out of the hospital where I was stabilized from trying to take my own life, and had 7 months to get back on my feet before I had to go to prison for 8.5 years. I'll never forget, he came to my doorstep and he said, Mark, prison's going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in your life with the journey you're ready to start. I mean, a guy that's getting ready to go to prison for 8.5 years, that just sounds impossible. So I ran back to the kitchen. I said, honey, there's somebody on the porch that's crazier than I am. And she said, that can't be. First thing she said. And I said, he said, this is going to be the beginning of my life, that I'm going to find my true purpose in my life. And she fell to her knees. And she said, Mark, and she fell in tears. And she said, I've been praying for you for 10 years. For 10 years I've been praying for you. And you haven't listened to me. And I pray you go out and listen to this man that God sent. So I went out and I said, Ian, what do you have in mind? Again, we didn't know each other. He was CFO of a pharmaceutical company, 5 young children, his wife a lawyer. He was part of a group, besides being a pharmaceutical company, called CBMC, as David talked about, that he and I are part of, Christian Businessmen Connection. That's a men's organization, one-on-one discipleship, but there's a CBWC, which is the women's organization, and their website is cbwc.biz. And they have the same tools and same discipleship tools that we have. They use a lot of things that's been developed over the last 90 years by CBMC. Because one-on-one discipleship needs to be men one-on-one and then women one-on-one. That's why they're two different organizations, because it is a very discipleship organization. So he took me through a content called Operation Timothy, which is on the cbmc.com website. Women use it too through CBWC. They call it Naomi and Ruth's. We call it Paul and Timothy's for Operation Timothy. So he took me through that. And he introduced me to God and introduced me to Jesus. And then shortly after he showed up, Chuck Colson showed up. And Chuck Colson spent a Saturday a month with me for 8.5 years while I was in prison, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And those two guys, the impact that they had on my life to introduce me to God and introduce me to Jesus at a time that I didn't even want to live, and I tried to take my own life, changed my life forever. And changed my life since June of 1998, which was my 3rd month in prison, when I got down on my knees and surrendered my life to Jesus. And then Ian and Chuck continue to pour into me to help me mature and grow in my faith. And I think the investment they made, I don't know how they found the time, but God put on their heart that there's nothing more important than discipleship. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through, as we talk about building a culture. And it's amazing. My wife and I are married 40 years this June. The divorce rate, if you go to prison, is a 99% divorce rate. 99%, and we're married 40 years as of June. A miracle of God. She moved to each prison with good behavior, get to go to better places, and so I had the chance to go to 3 prisons. Always a better place with each move. She moved to all 3 states and visited 20 hours a weekend for 8.5 years. Every Friday evening and every Saturday and Sunday, with about 5 wives out of about 700 inmates. So a miracle of God that she stayed with me, and that's where she said murder was an option, but divorce wasn't. She actually told me that about a week ago. Murder was an option. But divorce wasn't. So I wanted to share a personal example of culture. That's a culture not to have. That was a very selfish culture. We saw some of our employees cheating on, when you're involved with a price fixing scheme and lots of employees know about it, lying and cheating, well, then you get a lot of lying and cheating in the company. Expense report, fraud, and all type of things that are happening when you set that kind of example. You walk into, now in contrast, you walk into Coca-Cola. I had a chance to spend a couple days with them just last week in Charlotte. I'm talking about Coca-Cola Consolidated, the bottling company that does all the distribution for Coca-Cola. They have like 90 bottling plants around the country, and their headquarters are in Charlotte. And you walk in their headquarters, and the entire wall in Charlotte, when you walk in, Frank Harrison's the CEO there, the wall says, "We honor God in all we do." And what a difference. And I just look back, and I just wish Ian Howes would have reached out to me at like age 30 instead of 7 months before I went to prison. And it changed my life, because how great it would be part of a culture like that, and even build a culture like that in contrast. And by the way, ADM's a very good company today. When we went to prison, they replaced us with other executives. They hired a woman to be the CEO, and she was more ethics and compliance for Chevron vice president. They hired her, and she turned that company around. I mean, ADM is a different company than it was 22 years ago. And I think now they're like the 41st largest company in America. So let's talk about, what does God say about culture? I just want to give you a personal example first of living through, seeing good cultures and bad cultures like all of you have. We start off kind of sharing a bad culture. What does God say about culture? Well, here's one important thing he says. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, do it with all your heart like you're working for the Lord and not for man. I mean, think about that. No matter what position we're in a company, no matter what position, I don't care from the CEO to the shop floor, no matter what position we're in, if we're living like that, what would that do to a culture? And no matter where you're at, other people see that. I mean, you could be a department head or middle management of a department. Other people see that salt and light that you shine, and it changes the company. Like I said, ideal is if you got the CEO thinking this way, like I described, like at a Hobby Lobby or a Chick-fil-A, or like I described at Coca-Cola Consolidated. But no matter what position you're in, God wants us to live this way, right there. And that means no matter if you're in a post office or in a taxi, or no matter where you're at. What can we learn from Nehemiah? How many have read? How many are encouraged by the story of Nehemiah? I mean, a remarkable story. And Nehemiah was not a king; he was a civil servant level person. But I tell you what, God put the story of Nehemiah in the Bible for a reason, and we can learn a lot about culture, and we can learn a lot about leadership through Nehemiah. Well, we're going to go through each one of these steps, but I'm going to kind of just mention what the 4 steps, what Nehemiah did at first. First, he had to make an honest evaluation. He had to make an honest evaluation before he moved forward and tried to improve something, basically a new beginning. When you're looking about changing something, you're talking about a new beginning. Well, you got to first talk about, well, where were you? Where are we? Where are we now? You got to look at it. I had to look on June 4th, 1998, and I gave my life to Jesus, surrendered my life to Jesus. I had to get real. Things don't look too good to make an honest evaluation. I had 8 years of prison yet to go. That was my 3rd month in prison. So I had 8 years and 3 months yet to go when I surrendered my life to Jesus. But one has to make an honest evaluation where you're at. We're going to talk a little bit about that in detail. You got to identify with the need. You got to take personal responsibility, and you got to move out of comfort zones. And I'm going through this quick, but we're going to go through each one of these examples of what Nehemiah did. How about Nehemiah 1:3? Can someone, if you got YouVersion on your cell phone or a tablet with you, could someone read Nehemiah 1:3? There's going to be a few cases like this. They're all going to be in the book of Nehemiah. But if someone could read and share with us Nehemiah 1:3, chapter 1, verse 3. In the book of Nehemiah, please.
They said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile was a great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened when Nehemiah's brother and others came back, and they were giving Nehemiah, where the Babylonians destroyed, and now it was the Persia king, and Nehemiah was told about the state of Jerusalem. What's the status of Jerusalem? So now we're getting back, let's make an honest evaluation of where things really are. This is that first step that Nehemiah took, which all of us need to make when we want to improve ourselves, a new beginning, or we want to improve the culture in our company. He was making an honest evaluation. The people were in great distress. The wall of Jerusalem was completely broken down, and the gates were burned with fire. I mean, he didn't try to sugarcoat it and say, well, it's okay, we can rebuild it. The wall's down a little bit. No. He told the 100% clarity the truth. Things aren't good. People are in distress. People are depressed. The wall's broken down. And I tell you, it touched Nehemiah, and he could relate to it. He looked at that, well, gosh, that's God's country. God would not want this. And it really touched his heart. And that's important when you want to change yourself or you want to change your culture. You gotta feel that. You gotta feel that passion for that change, that God wants you to change. That's how he felt. How about Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4? So the first one was an honest evaluation of what the state of things are. He gave a very honest evaluation. So that's chapter 1, verse 4.
When I heard these things, I sat down and
He sat down and he wept. He prayed. That's one of the most important things you learn in the book of Nehemiah. How did he do it? I'll never forget, and I shared this story in the last session, but I see a lot of new people here in this session, so I want to share this because it's an important story, is that when I got out in 2006, 13 years ago, a miracle of God, just like my wife staying with me, I was hired back in the biotech industry and started off kind of middle management. I became the COO, the number 2 of a cancer research company over the 10 years that I was there. I'm still on their advisory board even today of that company. But I can remember calling Chuck Colson. It's 2006. I'm out. And I said, boy, Chuck, I just don't have I had 24 hours of free time when I was in prison. I don't have the time like that now for my quiet time. I do 15 minutes or a half hour, but I can't do 2 or 3 hours of quiet time. Now, I'm a busy guy now. Family, busy back in my career. And I'm looking at him, someone to hold me accountable, and a guy that's 25 years my senior. He passed in 2012 at 80 years of age. And I just looked somebody so mature in his faith, what I could learn from him. And I said, Chuck, I'm really concerned about that. I feel like I don't have time anymore. And then he gave me a quote from Martin Luther. And like I said, I see a lot of new faces here, so I'm going to share this. Martin Luther quote is this: I have so much to do today, there's no way I can get it all done. Therefore, I'm going to have to pray for 3 hours. That's the only way God can accomplish it. So in other words, so busy, you got to pray even more. You got to pray even more, not less. Because you can't accomplish it yourself, it's going to take God to accomplish it. And that really changed my life in 2006. To see not only do I have to pray quiet time, try to keep up with what I did in prison when I had 24 hours a day free time, I got to pray even more. Got to pray even more. Just like what Martin Luther said is so true, that I can't do any of these things. Only God can do them. And that's exactly what Nehemiah was done. You can see throughout the 13 chapters of Nehemiah, prayer was critical to Nehemiah. Critical. So Nehemiah identified with the need. Remember, the first was to give an honest assessment of what things were. Things were bad. And then that second step was to identify with the need. He could identify with it. He wept, he cried, and he relied on God and not himself for what the next steps would be. What about Nehemiah 1, 6 through 7? 6 and 7. We're going to get to the third step, what Nehemiah did as he builds this very leadership, can-do culture.
Listen to my prayers. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people in Israel. I confess that we have sinned against you. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. We have sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, the decrees, and regulations that you gave us through your servants,
Think about that. When he's praying, he says, we have sinned. He took personal responsibility. He didn't say they, those ones living, the Jews that are living in Jerusalem, sinned. He said we. He put himself all inclusive throughout that, in that chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, that we have sinned. He didn't blame others. He took full responsibility along with the others, saying, God, we have sinned against you. All of us, him included. And we need to do better, and we can do better. So taking responsibility. If you're going to change a culture, you got to change. You got to take, or you want to change your life and have a new beginning, we've got to take responsibility of where we're at currently. And that's what Nehemiah did. So he assessed the situation. It was bad. And then he took the second step, which was he identified with the need. He could feel for it. He had passion for it. He felt bad. Keep in mind, he prayed for almost 4 months before he went to Jerusalem. Almost 4 months he wept and prayed about the situation. And then he took personal responsibility, did not blame others. He said, God, what's happened here is your wrath, and we're all part of that. And we're getting your punishment that we deserve. Now we're going to talk about the fourth step. What about Nehemiah 1:11? Get into a fourth step that he took to change a culture.
So, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name. Give success to your servant today. Grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now, I was a cupbearer to the king.
Yeah. he moved out of his comfort zone. And you notice he mentioned he was the king's cup bearer. Basically, God, I'm a servant to do whatever you want me to do. I mean, I was sitting in prison, and now a Christian. I became a free man in prison. Basically, I was in prison to that addiction to greed before I went to prison, that obsession with greed and success and power. And now all of a sudden, I went from $2 or $3 million a year for 8 years to $20 a month for 8.5 years. And I became a free man in prison. It took me going to prison to become a free man. And on my 3rd month in prison, I assessed the situation. It doesn't look good. I'm in prison for another 8 years. I got a wife and children out there, and I'm earning $20 a month. I've got 3 kids. I said, God, how can you use me? I was a selfish leader before. My whole life at that point, up to 40, I was a selfish man. And I said, God, I don't even know how to be a servant leader. I don't even know how to do it. But I've got 8 years in prison. I want to become one. And God took me with those Operation Timothy books. I mean, I had a concrete floor, a 10 by 10, a roommate, and a locker for 8.5 years. And I looked at those books on that locker, the Bible that Chuck Colson gave me, the Operation Timothy books that Ian Howes gave me, and I thought, where are people more helpless and hopeless than federal prison? And I started discipling guys through Operation Timothy, one by one, just like they were me, introduced them to Jesus. And I took 61 guys one by one through those 9 years in prison. The most productive years of my life were at $20 a month in federal prison. And for the first time in my life, I became a servant leader during that time. Helped guys get their GEDs, learn how to read, learn how to write. I mean, it was so rewarding. I thought, boy, there was no bonus or no new car or no corporate jet that was more rewarding than actually helping someone else improve their life. So Nehemiah, he got out of his comfort zone. And first thing he did, he admits, he said, God, I'm a servant to the king, and I'm a servant to God himself. A servant leader. And to be a servant leader, he knew he was going to get out of his comfort zone and be doing things he hadn't done in his previous life. So those are the first initial steps to build a culture and to change things. And now we're going to continue to move. So he made an honest evaluation of where they're at in Jerusalem, which was in shambles. And the wall was destroyed and the gates were in fire. He identified with the need. He was in tears and he prayed because he felt for the people. He took full responsibility. He took personal responsibility himself. He said, God, we have sinned against you. We, included himself, personal responsibility. And then he saw himself. He said, I want to be your servant. Servant to the king, and then servant to the real king. King of kings, being God. So that's the 4th step, moving out of comfort zones. Now let's look at the next step. So those were the initial steps for Nehemiah to rebuild Jerusalem, which rebuilt a culture. Build a team spirit was one of the first steps. As kind of you look at the next phase 2, let's call it, to build a team spirit. Boy, did Nehemiah build a team spirit. He did. I mean, when you read those 13 chapters of Nehemiah, I mean, people wanted to follow him because he was such a servant leader, and he also did everything he expected someone else to do. He did himself. He was sweating right alongside of them and all the work they did in rebuilding that wall. Keep in mind, he prayed for about 100 days and built the wall in 52. 52 days. And everybody, when he got to Jerusalem, they were laughing and saying it can never be done. He had enemies. For everybody building the wall around the clock, there was somebody keeping an eye on the enemies that wanted to destroy it. They did not want that wall and those gates to come back up. So one's building, another one's watching out for that one that's building. I mean, that's building a team and a team spirit. I mean, he had 42 groups that were involved with this. Some were watching and keeping an eye, and some were building as he was building this wall around Jerusalem. A common goal, you needed to have a strategic plan. David and I are involved with the strategic plan of CBMC and the vision. And we have this vision to double the number of cities that will be in 650 cities within 10 years, which is double where we're at today. And that's our vision and our strategic plan. But then you got to have a plan. Well, how do you get there? That's your vision where you want to get to. When you look at your map, you want to get to Miami, Florida by tomorrow, but how do you get there? In what direction do you go? And all the steps along the way. You got the team members have to have a common goal to get there. So Nehemiah not only had a great vision, we're going to rebuild this wall and stop all this depression and everyone in distress that they're in. we're going to rebuild this wall and give us safety again. But the team players were excited about that too. They wanted to follow him. And then he sees the opportunity. Say, hey, you may not be the best builder. You're going to keep eye. You know, everybody, God gives us all with different skill sets. So some are keeping eye, some are keeping watch, some are building. He's using the skill sets depending on what God's given all of us. He gives us different skill sets. So he sees the opportunities Nehemiah did. What about Nehemiah 2, 17 and 18, 17 through 18? Nehemiah chapter 2. There's just going to be a couple more of those we're going to read along the way. Anybody like to share that?
So I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned. Come, let's rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace. I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. They said, let's start rebuilding. Their hands were strengthened to do this good work.
Yeah. He motivated the people. He said he shared that vision. I mean, when you have a strategic plan, you've got to have a vision that the people around you, no matter if it's something for a church project, something at your company, no matter in our private life and our ministry life, we've got projects we want to accomplish. And you have a vision and you want everyone to follow you. Nehemiah did a great job in sharing that vision where everybody said, boy, we want to be part of that. Tell me what you want me to do next. But they all wanted to be part of it. He motivated and people followed him. What a great leader. What a great example of building a great culture. Nehemiah 2, 19 through 20.
Heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem.
What that is saying is Nehemiah, if you say what Nehemiah did in one word, we talk about he prayed. If you thought another word that's not about how much he prayed, is how focused he was. Nehemiah was focused. He was laser focused. When they had a decision, just like we have on our double our number of cities, that's 40 cities a year that we have to add to CBMC to be 650 cities by 2028. Boy, David will tell you that we don't think of anything else but that. We're about 40 cities increase a month. We're focused, laser focused. And what happens is people get excited about that. They see how important it is. And passion, enthusiasm is contagious. When you show enthusiasm and passion, others are going to follow that. Nehemiah 21, 4, 21, and 23. There's not many more of these we're doing. This will actually be the last one reading. Nehemiah 4, 21, and 23. Another important step of Nehemiah.
We worked early and late, from sunrise to sunset. Half the men were always on guard. I also told everyone living outside the walls to stay in Jerusalem. That way they and their servants could help with guard duty at night and work during the day. During this time, none of us, not I nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, ever took off their clothes. We carried our weapons with us at all times, even when we went into water.
You notice he said even when. He was a hands-on leader. Whatever he was expecting them to do, keep watch, build, go get food. No matter what he expected them to do, he did himself. He was a hands-on leader, and he showed by example in building that wall. There was not any job that he didn't do himself that he expected them to do. And as you notice when he's sharing that scripture there, he said, we did this, we did that. We didn't even have time to change our clothes. We worked from early morning till late at night. It was we. He didn't go home at 5 and sleep and let all them work and be there the next morning. He was there till late with them. So a very hands-on leader. Very important when you're building culture that people see you're all in. Again, no matter what level in the organization you are and you want to change for the culture to change the group around you, They've got to see you're all in yourself. You just can't come in and say, we honor God and all we're going to do, we're going to change our culture. You got to see the action steps. They got to see it, not just read it or hear it. Let's kind of go through the steps again as he built this culture. First thing he did, he made an honest evaluation of where you're at. Just like in your own company or your own ministry or a group in your church, a small group that you have and you're trying to accomplish things, you got to make an honest evaluation. Where are we? And you got to tell the good, bad, and the ugly. Identify with the need. You've got to feel it. You got to say, gosh, I want to change this. I'm not real happy where things are at right now, and I want to change it. You've got to feel it in your heart. It can't just be somebody say, hey, go change this. You've got to feel it. You've got to take ownership of it. Take personal responsibility. Don't blame others. This is where we're at right now. Let's not worry about the past, how it got there. What we're concerned about is where we're going in the future. So don't spend a lot of time blaming. Spend a lot of time growing and moving forward. And moving out of your comfort zone, just like Nehemiah did things in his life that he never did in his life when they built this wall in 52 days around Jerusalem. So very important to get out of your comfort zones. A comfort zone for me was not important. A comfort zone for me was a 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage. But now I was in a concrete floor, a 10 by 10, and a locker and a roommate. But I had to get out of that comfort zone and find ways to be productive even in that situation. And what I could be productive was helping guys get their GEDs, learn how to read, and learn how to write. There were so many productive things I could do, even in a situation like that in prison. Build a team spirit to get people to follow you, to be all in and to show that enthusiasm. It's important. What you don't want to do is you got a team, one guy's going this way, another guy's going east, another one's west, another one's south. You want to all be going the same direction. Have a common goal. That's the importance of a vision and a strategic plan to be able to implement that vision. Seize on the opportunities. I seized on the opportunities to disciple these guys. I was in prison. That's where I was at that time. I had a chance to have a 6-month sentence. My wife would say today that thank God I didn't take the 6-month sentence. I would have came out the same man, greedy man that I went in. God gave me exactly what I needed, was 9 years, she says. I think 2 years would have been enough, but I know 6 months wouldn't. But I seized the opportunity. Where God has me, what can I do in God's work where he has me right now? Motivate your people. Stay focused, laser focused, Nehemiah was, and lead by example. These are the steps. And by the way, I have my card up here, and get anybody a card, and all you have to do is email me, and just in the subject area would like slides of the culture, and I'll send you the entire slide deck of this slide deck. Plus there's going to be video available too, showing these slides in the presentation. But if you like the slides yourself, I'll be happy to send those to you. So what would you do today? What would you do today? And this is not the answer right now, but to leave here and pray about that. Can you leave and what can you learn from Nehemiah that can actually have a new beginning in your own life? Either in your company or your personal life, your church life. And I'm going to end it with this. Has anybody ever seen the Francis Chan, the rope? Has anybody ever seen that? Well, it looks like most of you have not, and I'd like to share this. Look at this rope, and look at this rope that's going around the world. Let's say in eternity, this rope is. There's no end to it, predict, okay? Just think there's no end to it, this rope. It goes around the world. Around the world. And it's infinite. Just like our time, eternity. Millions and millions of years. Okay, that's how this rope is. It's going around the world, around it, and around it multiple times. And never ending. Now look at this part here on red. That's about 1 inch. Well, the rope is eternity. In life, there's going to be eternity. Either in heaven with Jesus or in hell, but there is eternity. This red, this inch, is life here on earth. It's 100 years, this inch. And often I find myself trapped in this too, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do this up to this 3/4 the inch. I'm going to work hard and going to save, and that way this next, after the 3/4 of an inch, I can eat well and go to restaurants and travel and with my wife. And I mean, we focus so much on this 100 years, but just think billions of years, eternity. What we learn from Nehemiah and what we especially learn from Jesus to focus on the eternity, which really important. To do here on earth what will actually build treasures in heaven. All those things I would have had in that garage, that Ferrari and all those cars in 1992, they're probably rust now. Think about it. That's 25 years. That's going on 30 years in a couple years from now. That's rust and gone. But we're taking those guys through prison and having that impact with them and leading them to Jesus where they're now going to heaven. I mean, Jesus saved them, but we plant the seeds. We do some of the work for Jesus. We're the seed planters, and Jesus can do his work. I mean, those are heavenly treasures versus all that other stuff is rust and rubbish by now. So I just pray that all of us focus not on this inch, on this 100 years here on earth, but we focus on millions and billions of years and live our life today that we're preparing for eternity with Jesus. Well, thank you for letting me share. What a blessing to share here today about that. And like I said, I'd be happy to send you the slides. I'd be happy to give you my card with my email address. And all you have to put in the subject area, slides on culture, and I'll put a reply and get those slides to you. God bless all of you. Thank you.